Hey, today we are really privileged to have Richard Aboulafia on with us. For anybody who knows Richard, he is the man in commercial business and defense. Just one of the world's premier analysts with the Teal Group, and I'm thrilled to have him on. So, hey, Richard, how are you?
I'm great, Craig. Great to be on. Thanks for having me.
So you are absolutely. I love reading your articles in Aviation Week.
Thanks.
I know you're a known entity to Wall Street Journal, and they're always reaching out to you for your expert advice. So I thank you for being on. Good to have you.
My pleasure.
Let's start with commercial aviation. We've had a lot of 2019 has been a pretty exciting year with the MAX. A lot of stuff happening internationally. Wide body aircraft. You have people pulling back from wide bodies, going to more narrow bodies. Where do you see the trend? Where do you see the trends going?
Yeah, there are so many interesting things to talk about in the commercial jetliner space. And yes, I would use the term exciting year. Chinese blessing and curse. May you live in an exciting year. One of the strangest aspects of it is I'll start off with one very odd theme, which is the complete breakdown of cause and effect. You look at the history of this business, and it's a very simple process. GDP drives, economic growth and GDP drive passenger traffic demand, which of course drive airline orders for jets, which ultimately impact deliveries. Not necessarily the same, but obviously that's a pretty good long-term indicator. And here we've got this environment where there's nothing wrong with GDP. I mean, there are intimations and concerns about global growth and trade and all this other stuff, but GDP has held up just fine. And yet passenger traffic has suffered a serious blow after February. And this is after a remarkable 10-year run of above trend numbers. Matter of fact, last year was 6.5% year-over-year growth in revenue passenger kilometers. The year before that, 2017, of course, was 7.6%. Mm-hmm. Long-term sustainable is 5.5, somewhere in that zone. And then all of a sudden in March, you had this nasty downshift to about 4%, which is where we've been up and down for the year since. But that doesn't appear to be driven by GDP. Part of it might be a capacity constraint thing. Part of it might be concerns about global trade. Part of it might be an unusual canary in the coal mine moment where people are thinking there's going to be a downturn, so they're flying less. It's hard to know what's going on, but predictably, of course, orders have collapsed. The Dubai Air Show provided a welcome respite from that, but otherwise, numbers were not good. And meantime, continuing the complete breakdown of cause and effect, deliveries have held up, or in the case of Boeing, production has held up,
right,
just because they're not delivering the jets. But this does not look anything like the normal pattern of events you've seen in the jetliner business for many years now.
You got, between Boeing, 5,000 MAXs in backlog, Airbus about the same. I mean, 10,000 airplanes in backlog is, 50 a month per customer. Say Boeing is delivering the MAX. They're going to deliver 50. Airbus is going to deliver 50 narrow bodies. It's 100 a month. You got 100 months of backlog, if I do the math right. Does a dip in orders matter that much to these guys with that type of backlog inventory?
Yeah, good question. Two things to think about. One is that these wonderful numbers in the narrow body front are kind of cold comfort for the folks who build twin aisles. And historically, twin aisles are a source of considerable profit. But rates are just under pressure across the board, aside from basically two programs, the 787, and even there's been a bit of a slight downshift, and the A350. Everything else is under very heavy pressure. So it's become a very spotty market despite the health of the single aisle front. Another is that, 50 sounds like a lot, but both Airbus and Boeing, frankly, just want to keep pulling levers to bring in money. So the current ambition at Boeing is to get to rate 57. The current ambition at Airbus is to get to rate 63, with talk to suppliers about perhaps even rate 70 and maybe even beyond. So in other words, it's never enough just to rest on your laurels and flatten out, but people want to keep moving. So from that standpoint, yeah, the hit to orders has been noticeable.
So let's go away from wide body and narrow body a little bit. Let's go a little bit smaller. The A220, you know, by all means, a really good airplane. Technically a really good airplane, really efficient. Seems like it's got some ability to grow into some different routes. Is it ever going to be a great seller?
I think you're getting there, very definitely. I've always been a big fan of what was the C series. It's just that, frankly, from the standpoint of Bombardier, when they launched it a decade or so ago, it was an act of suicide. There was absolutely no way they could compete. This, as you know, is not a business based upon the best. It's based upon production costs.
Right.
And theirs were miserable compared to Airbus and Boeing. So making this an Airbus product, and now subject to Airbus's tough supply chain negotiations, has produced an aircraft that is competitive. And you're starting to see some very nice sales, most notably this year, JetBlue and Moxie, and of course the Delta order. And I think you'll see a lot more. Basically it was driving Bombardier to the ground. They had to get rid of it. They can never hope to do more than 4 or 5 per month. It looks like now Airbus won't have a problem getting to 10 per month with that program, and possibly even beyond. It's and from the standpoint of the traveling public, I think it offers a lot of potential for new route development. Thin, medium-sized routes, even transcon ones. It's a really nice aircraft. And what's going to be interesting to see when the Embraer-Boeing deal is finally concluded, probably in the first quarter of the coming year, whether exactly the same process will repeat itself with the Embraer E2 series, which will have a lot of similar capabilities, and Boeing will, of course, apply its own supply chain muscle to getting the cost there down. That's going to be interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, no, that was going to be my next question. Now, is you're going to see the same, if the A220 starts to get some legs on it and some traction, you start to see the same thing on the E2, which is also, quite frankly, pretty successful, technologically wise. It's a good jet.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Embraer always does a really great job. It's just that, again, this is an industry built on scale, and it's very tough for small niche producers to compete. To their credit, they realized what was going on when Bombardier went into Airbus's hands with its big jets, and they realized they had no choice. And we're seeing that unfold now.
Well, that was you go back, and I was at Bombardier when the C series was announced, and I think it was less Boeing and Airbus did a great job boxing Bombardier in. It had very little to do, I think, with Bombardier. Otherwise, like you said, the supply chain costs. But I think Boeing and Airbus looked at this thing and said, "Hey, it could be a threat," and the E-Jet as well. And they just did a good job. They just did a good job boxing it in with the 319, the 320, and the variants of the 737.
Yeah.
Gave Bombardier really nowhere to maneuver to.
Yeah, and it looks set to end in tragedy because it is a really good jet. Bombardier did a great job designing it. I would actually argue that it's one of the best examples of doing the right technology trades. Whether it's the aluminum alloy or the CFRP wings, or or the geared turbofans, everything they did about it in terms of its design process was dead on. It's just that, as you say, they were completely boxed in by some very aggressive pricing by Airbus and then Boeing.
What do you think? Obviously the MAX has been taking the headlines this year. Tragedy all around. For Boeing, for obviously the victims of the. How do you think this affects, FAA certification? How airplanes are designed. I mean, as we were talking before we came online, in the United States and Europe, we're spoiled. We have some unbelievably good pilot training. People are around airplanes. Pilots tend to be around airplanes, all their lives. But I don't think that capability is really taken to many parts of the world.
Yeah,
how do you think airplanes are now? What happens next?
yeah, that's a big question, and there's no question that this basically means that the Boeing philosophy, where the pilot is ultimately in charge and whatever else is giving way towards, or will continue to give way towards, more of an Airbus system of higher level of automation and computer control. And of course, to look at it sort of in between, I think one reason a lot of pilots might be a bit upset at Boeing right now is because they regard the MCAS system as sort of the back door to a kind of a hybrid fly-by-wire control system. And I understand that, and but it probably means that Boeing designs in the future are going to go all the way, and be just as heavily automated as the Airbus system, for better or worse. No, I think the other question you're pointing to is well, the time and resources necessary for certification in a world where there are fewer ODAs and DERs and all these other acronyms we've grown used to. Basically a little bit less industry control over the certification process, and no doubt it's going to take more time. And I think even more importantly, it will be a while before the global system of aircraft certification reciprocity is fully restored. Right now, everyone understandably wants to, basically redo everything that the FAA is doing and have complete control of that process. And it might be some time before they completely trust them to have the full resources and wherewithal to have a process that is simply stamped by their own people rather than replicated.
Does the ODA system go away, or does it change remarkably?
I think there's probably going to be a greater level of inspection and oversight for it. I hope it doesn't go away. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense, just because these are complex systems, and frankly, very often only the contractor, can really understand. It just makes more sense to have people who can parachute in and say, "Hey, we want a full explanation of everything going on here." With the ability to punish if corners are being cut. I think one of the most interesting aspects of this, and I would hope it's a broader conversation in Washington. I have my doubts that it will be, but we had the Reagan Revolution, which in many ways was terrific, deregulation. But did we go too far? Did we keep deregulating to the point where, not to make any kind of equivalence here, but, for the point where, well, drinking water in Flint, Michigan, yeah, whatever, who cares? Did we go too far with deregulation? And, you had an administration that came in with the mantra that we're going to destroy 2 rules that exist for every new one we create. That there might be a place for that, but in the world of, say, air safety, that's completely toxic, as the saying goes. Those rules were, in fact, written in blood. I think there needs to be a different mindset in Washington. And we've got to be more careful, because no matter how great the Reagan Revolution was, you can go too far.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's and you're absolutely right. It's all written in blood. But the level of safety we see, I mean, granted the MAX crashes earlier in the year, but you think about in the United States, one fatal incident on a Southwest airliner when the engine let go, that kind of a fluke, but the industry has seen, I mean, unbelievable levels of safety over the last decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly right. And I am concerned that maybe we're seeing a slight overreaction there, because, you look at that's precisely it. Southwest, 2 things about Southwest. Obviously, that was the only onboard fatality since they were created in 1978, I believe. An incredible safety record. And as Herb Keller always used to say, they compete with the family car, and every day the equivalent of a 737-200 is destroyed on the nation's roads in terms of passenger
right.
death. In other words, Southwest saved untold thousands of lives. with its operating philosophy. The idea that we should have to bear these huge costs because of this one, real fluke. I mean, there are 7,000 737 NGs out there. I think this happened once. Are inspections possibly warranted? Yeah. Major redesign, that might be going too far.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I absolutely agree with you. And you think about rotor burst protection, things that have been designed into airplanes, and once again, the level of certification, the amount of safety that's designed into the airplanes. I just don't think, the public really understands the feeding and care that these airplanes are designed to, with safety in mind first.
That's right.
Yes, Boeing's taken a beating on the MAX, but I've always been somewhat of a defender on them too. I'm like, hey, look, there's never one cause of a mishap. It's always a chain of events.
That's
And
exactly right.
let's quit pointing fingers and shouting at people, and let's pull back and say, all right, what needs to change on the whole thing? Let's fix it, and we'll continue to move on, and in a year or so, this will all be behind us, and the world will be good again.
I think that's exactly right. And, as somebody who travels all over the world, in a year, I won't be at all concerned about flying in the MAX. I think they're going to get it right. I think they've probably already gotten it right. It's just a question of getting certification sign off. I got to tell you, I am a little concerned about flying in some parts of the world where maybe all the lessons aren't being learned in terms of maintenance, in terms of pilot procedure. There are reasons to be concerned. And I honeymooned in Indonesia many, many years ago, and reading that New York Times story about Lion Air and its record just a couple of days ago in the Times was frankly chilling.
Yeah.
Will those lessons be learned, and will they be acted upon to the same extent that Boeing's MCAS will be acted upon? That's a really big question that people should be asking.
I think what really angers me the most, and it does anger me, is a couple of years ago on a beautiful clear day, an Asiana aircraft tries to do an uncoupled approach into San Francisco. You've got 40,000 hours of collective flight time in the cockpit. They hit the retaining wall, the seawall, and the first question they ask the pilots is, did you guys know how to do an uncoupled approach? And the answer was no. And I think, at the end of the day, I as much as Boeing has been skewered for the design on the MAX, I think that the world needs to wake up and say, wait a minute, pilot training, if we've got universal design standards to meet for aircraft safety, there needs to be universal training requirements and cockpit, levels of experience in the cockpit across the world. And maybe it's a universal standard that everybody has to meet. If it's a 1,500 hour rule or whatever, maybe that needs to be addressed.
I completely agree, and it is a bit concerning. The big tragedy of the previous decade, of course, was Air France 447 out of Brazil, and anyone who's read William Languish's rather excellent piece in The Atlantic about that flight back about 5 years ago, I think, it really shows that, even for a first quality carrier like Air France and a highly automated system like the A330, tragedy can still result from people not quite recognizing what's going on. And it's experiences like that should be teaching us about the importance of pilot training for contingencies like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. No. And once again, I think there's, maybe just a push for a universal standard should,
Sure.
become a priority. Let's shift gears a little bit. The Green New Deal. English lawmakers now want to ban business jets. Bruges, Belgium wants to ban tourists now. And I think the same where else? In Croatia, another town said the same. You've got obviously a lot of, low-cost carriers in Europe. Everybody's talking about jets and their pollution. How does that affect where we are in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes wake up and think that's the biggest single threat, really. I mean, not just the ecological part, but municipalities pushing back against tourism, sort of an anti-tourism culture, whether it's in Barcelona or Venice or Dubrovnik, as you say. I mean, it's any number of places that are rethinking. And I sometimes wonder whether I've had the privilege of spending much of my adult life in sort of the golden era of cheap and easy international travel.
Mhm.
I wonder about that. In terms of the green aspect, I think we just got to push back that we're the most efficient and self-policing form of transport ever designed by humans. I mean, we get better every year by about 1% on average or more. No, yeah, and that's because we have to. If one airline improves its efficiency, somehow all the other ones have to copy. Otherwise, they'll quickly be outpriced and outprofited, and they'll die. So we get better and better and better. Trucking doesn't do that. Shipping doesn't do that. Nobody does that except for the aviation industry. And we're still a very small percentage of global emissions. I hope we're not penalized just because we're seen as completely discretionary.
Yeah, no, I agree. You just see, the advent of flight shaming, airplane shaming now, flight shaming. I'm like, wait a minute, I can fly anywhere I want in Europe for 50 euros each way on Ryanair.
Yeah,
Um, you know, yeah, maybe, yeah. If there's anybody who's affected, maybe it's all the Easy Jets and the Ryanairs and all the LCCs that have popped up, and we're flying full. And really changing the landscape of the continent over there.
yeah. I mean, I am concerned. It does seem a bit irrational. I mean, having said that, you got to be, if there's one great lesson of the last century is that you can really go horribly wrong underestimating the passion and political power of young people. So you got to be careful not to reject it, but on the other hand, you got to push back because there's a lot they don't understand. The very fact that Greta Thunberg, I believe that's her name,
The
the rather
16-year-old.
talented 16-year-old. I think she's very talented at mobilizing sentiment. But that whole bizarre incident of her going with a yacht to New York I mean, I would have understood is that if she'd said, "Hey, look, we just shouldn't travel. We're going to do a video conference here." I think that would have been a remarkable moment, and I would have been chilled by it, but I would have respected it. But instead, the idea of traveling by a yacht and flying people to operate that yacht, it
Yep.
was just complete ignorance of economics and carbon footprint and everything like that, just for the sake of optics. I was baffled by it.
Yeah. So that whole thing is just that whole thing to me is bizarre, and I just have to turn it off when I see it. It's like Al Gore. It was like Al Gore flying around in his G2.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just go take let's go take an old technology airplane and talk. Yeah, fly it at 500 hours a year and talk about how we're ruining the environment. Yeah, I get it. So yeah, speaking of G, yeah. So speak now. We'll shift the gears one more time. Yeah, business aviation. We are we flatlined for a while? Are we stable? Are we going to see some bullish trends, bearish trends? Where do you think the world economy takes Gulfstream and Bombardier and Dassault and Embraer and
It's a
Cessna?
it's a very funny situation. Since 2008, the great implosion of business aircraft demand, um, there's two ways to look at it. One, yeah, there was a bit of a recovery. The second is if you remove a couple hundred Gulfstream 650s from that, no, there was no recovery. In other words, the stuff at the top end that cost 75 million, that's doing all right. Everything else has basically stayed exactly in place. It never recovered. And right now, the discussion is, hey, if there's a world economic downturn, any kind of recession in the US, whatever, how would that impact an already not very good market? I would argue that, hey, if the market didn't benefit from the economic upturn, why would it get hurt by a downturn? I just think we are where we are. There are other people who I respect who say, no, we're going to get clobbered with a double dip. I don't see it, but I understand where that's coming from. I understand the concern. But from the standpoint of the market moving forward, it seems the only thing you can count upon is that people at the very top are still going to have money to spend. And that's why all of the product development cash has been going to those very top product segments. Obviously, at NBAA this year, you had the launch of the Gulfstream 700 to compete with the Global 7500, which also has just arrived. It's all about the stuff at the top. And the problem, of course, is that as they pump out aircraft at the top, every segment below that kind of feels that pressure of trade-ins and cast downs and whatever. So it could just be that you've got this classic, there's a bunch of mice scurrying around while a couple of elephants fight, and you hope to avoid the giant pachyderm's feet.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm gonna just throw out some numbers there. I'm gonna assume a 20% gross margin on a G700. So everyone they kick out the door, they put on everyone they kick out the door. It's 15 million in gross profit on a green airplane.
Yeah, sure.
And look, I like the $15 million one better than a $1.5 million on a $10 million Phenom 300. You're making money 1.5 million bucks at a time if you're Embraer. That's a pretty tough slog. Versus Gulfstream, it's bigger it's always easier at the top. I mean, to make money. I think it's pretty much the rule of the game.
Yeah, that's certainly true, both in terms of profit, but also in terms of demand. You're not catering to some guy who runs a chain of muffler shops who wants to fly a Cessna between them and is easily crunched himself by some issue with credit or some issue with the economic downturn. Instead, you're competing at the top with the Sultan of Brunei and random sheikhs and of course top Fortune 100 corporations. That's a very different dynamic. So not only is it more profitable, but it tends to hold up better when the market shifts. And not only that, but at the very top, you've just got Bombardier and Gulfstream, and that's it. As opposed to at the lower rungs, as you know, that's more of a hornet's nest.
It's very crowded down. It's very crowded down there. We're a year away, just about a little 13 months away from the ADS-B mandate. Does that help the market at all, really, or does a lot of airplanes are going to go? A lot of airplanes are going to come out of service. Does that increase demand a little bit, or do those people just go to charter and fractional, or what's your crystal ball saying?
Well, there are a lot of smart people who've been opining about the impact of ADS and what it means. There's something, oh gosh, I don't want to quote the number, of something like 20% or 18%, something like that, non-compliant. So there is potential, but I tend to put my hat on the side that there might be a bit of a bloodletting in terms of retirements. There's always been sort of this large number of underutilized, rather old aircraft. We used to joke that we're going to establish a Lockheed Jetstar index. The number of Lockheed Jetstars still flying around out there. And until recently, of the 202 built, about half were still, working for some I don't know, missionaries in West Africa or whatever. It was a very odd situation. So I tend to think there are a lot of that, your early hawkers or early citations that are kind of waiting to go to the land of aluminum cans. But of course, there will be opportunities, some replacement, not much replacement. I think, fractional charter and with an additional bit of last minute retrofit, of course.
Yeah. I mean, the MRO, look at the MRO side of the house, it's boom times for another year. And then once the mandate, is up, it'll be interesting to see what happens to shop capacity. I know if you're an avionics shop now, you're just booked solid for the next 13 months. After that, it will be very interesting to see where the industry goes in the aftermarket.
Sure, feast or famine.
Absolutely. What's the between commercial, business aviation, defense? What's the one big trend that you think is the most important that we haven't really talked about?
Well, so many. I think the biggest thing. Well, just to quickly touch upon defense, don't neglect it because boy, the numbers are fantastic. And that's not just true for the F-35. It's also true for the associated munitions and for the many fourth generation aircraft that are out there still in production. It's go back to the Cold War. The U.S. had 4 production lines. Yeah, actually, if there was plus a bunch of other sort of ancillary, what was the F-117, kind of a production line, but 4 primary production lines. 3 of them are around today, and they've been joined by a 4th in the F-35. So, the only thing that died after the Cold War was the F-14.
Right.
15, 16, 18, still very much in production and actually quite healthy. So the numbers there are terrific. But in terms of the one biggest single trend that I look at and I think about a lot is China and the jetliner market, because it's so important as a growth market and even as a current market. Last year, 23% of the world's jetliners went to China. They're the single biggest source of third-party finance in jetliner transactions. If we are looking for a split between China and the US and perhaps even the West, for political reasons, for trade reasons, for whatever, there's going to be a prolonged and profound period of painful adjustment. And that's the thing to watch. This won't play out over a year or 2 years. There might be momentary hiccups, like Boeing went from rate 14 to rate 12 on the 787 because of the failure of both sides to reach an agreement on a trade deal. It's aside from stuff like that, I think you're talking about a longer decade of structural readjustment if they are really going to copy the old Soviet Union and go down that path. I hope they don't. I think we're better together. I think the industry would really be hurt by this, but nevertheless, it's the most interesting big picture issue to watch.
There's a lot of Chinese money coming into the leasing arena.
It really is. It's been that way for some time. And those of us who remember back in the early 90s when the Japanese played that role, it was as nothing compared to this.
Yeah. I mean, does that help the long-term trend? Does that sort of keep let's just say a decoupling process from really occurring?
That's a great question, and on the one hand, yes, it should, because of course they've got a financial stake in this Western aviation system. On the other hand, history is replete with people saying, oh, this can't possibly happen. We're just simply too well integrated. France and Germany, 1914, there's so much trade between them.
Right.
So I hope you're right. It makes a lot of sense, but, history is irrational, isn't it?
Well, look, the whole trade war thing, I think, the whole trade war wasn't just started overnight. I mean, there were a lot of CEOs speaking quietly to the White House saying,
Sure.
yeah, look, this is happening. We need to fix it. Trump came in and he made a stance, and he's taken a lot of, right or wrong, he took a stance, and here we are today. Now, if things either together we get the stuff fixed, or together we don't. But it's this has been brewing for a decade, and the Obama administration and the Bush administration were affected with it too. So
Absolutely.
I think that the protection of IP. I think China does need to come to the table with protection of IP and some other stuff. And I think that they'll, as they become more technologically advanced and they're developing their own products, they'll find religion with that regard too. We're just not there yet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But, it's funny, the aviation business, I guess we're sort of a funhouse mirror image of every other part of the economy. We're the weird guys. And that's certainly, there's never a place where it's more true than with IP. I think you had this weird system where everyone in the aviation business was sort of incentivized to give the Chinese IP because they were able to control it and, say, here's our latest and best from 1987. And as a result, you had, the first Chinese jet, the ARJ-21. Basically, it's a 1987 jet. There was something that really worked about that. I don't think it did for the rest of the economy. The people who make computers and God knows what else were sick and tired of having their IP stolen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, I think if there's one big thing that comes out of this, once again, if, I think theft of IP, Yeah, and trade barriers. It's two things that everybody needs to come into agreement on, and if you can get there, everything else is simple. But yeah, it's just getting there. It's gonna be a slog for the next year.
Yeah,
And yeah,
if the patient can just take one giant 2 foot 30 pound pill, he'll be cured.
yeah, exactly. So, hey, so we've been on 45 minutes, and I think it's probably a great stepping off point. But will you come back? Will you come back in a couple months, and we can pick up the conversation and talk about the next trends in 2020?
Oh, that would be my pleasure. Really great to talk about the world's greatest industry. Thank you.
Richard, thank you for coming on. I love reading your stuff in Aviation Week. It's always spot on. I love the expertise you're giving about the industry and all the business magazines, and just really enjoyed having you on today. Thank you.
Oh, it's very much my pleasure, Craig. Thanks for having me on.
So, Richard, one last question: how do people get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah, thanks. You can read everything I write publicly, get links to everything I write, and of course, find a point of contact at www.richardaboulafia.com.
Perfect. That sounds great, and keep it going from there. Thanks, Richard, once again.